Welcome to Truth to Power on Forward Radio. This is Hart Hagan, and I'm joined by Jake Bush of Democratic Socialists of America, Kelli McGuffey, who's a mom and activist in Springfield, Tennessee, K.A. Owens from On the Edge with K.A. Owens on Forward Radio, and myself, I have the climate report. So how are you all doing today?
Doing really well, trying to stay cool in this heat wave we're going through.
Good. Glad you could join us. How are you, Jake?
I am sweaty. That is how I'm doing. I'm good, mostly. As good as you can be given the circumstances.
K.A., how are you?
Well, I'm doing good. I mean, people ask me that question. I said I always answer that the country we live in is going through intense turmoil, but I'm doing well. So what that means for the future, I'm not quite sure.
No, I mean, that's what I say. I'm doing great. The planet is sucking wind, and the powers that be are rolling over people like they're like a steamroller, and people are suffering and dying every day because of a sick system that we have, a sick political system, economic system. Anyway, but like Ralph Nader points out, the happiest people are those that are engaged in trying to make the world a better place. I think that's because we human beings are, by nature, we're collective. By nature, we're collectivists. By nature, we care about others, and this system that we're in tries to get us to ignore that so that a few people can grab a lot of money by making everybody else cynical. But I digress. But I'm getting ahead of myself here.
Not that you have a habit of doing that or anything.
No, not like I would ever digress or jump ahead of myself. But we're talking about Race Matters by Cornel West. And we brought some quotes to this conversation. And I'm going to say that here's a quote from Cornel West from Race Matters. It says, "We must focus our attention on the public square, the common good that undergirds our national and global destinies. The vitality of any public square ultimately depends on how much we care about the quality of our lives together." And what I just said is, I think it's human nature to think that and feel that, but we have a political system, an economic system, a media, the entertainment media and the news media that wants to beat that out of us. So that's my commentary on that. But what do you all think about it? What I get from this, we got to focus on the common good. It's like a guy named Slavoj Žižek said, all of our problems today are problems with the commons. We have forgotten that we have a commons, that we have a public square, that we have common assets that we need to manage together, such as the climate and the air and the water and the wildlife. Those are common assets that we have to manage together. Plus, a number of things that we care about are better managed at the public level, like public schools, like public libraries, like a public healthcare system would be a better way to do things. And most people believe that, but yet we have this ideology called the free market, which is supposed to be scientific, but it's a load of crap.
Yeah, I think it's important that we start with this, right? Because a lot of what we're going to be talking about are quote unquote race issues. And they are race issues because they have a significant impact on racialized peoples. But what the bedrock of all of this is, West's ideology as what he would call a radical Democrat. Right. And I know we mentioned this on the last show too, but I want to stress that just as the bedrock of our conversation, that what he's talking about is this honestly pretty simple idea that, democracy is good and
Right.
that it should be extended not just in the voting booth, but also to every other facet of our lives, in the marketplace, in production, in the workplace and all this. And I think that, as you said, Hart, it's a pretty easy concept, really. It's a natural concept for people I think of the scholar Sylvia Federici, who sort of one of the real cornerstones of her work was talking about how, as you said, Hart, like there is this, intentional effort to break that. You know what I mean? That it wasn't always the case where there wasn't a commons. It wasn't always a case where people did not collectively try to do for one another in a formal way, right? That's not how it always was. It's sort of like David Harvey talking about dialectics, right? It's like dialectics seems like such a vast, difficult thing to understand, but it's the kind of thing that when you talk to a little kid, they're like, oh yeah, no, I get it. You know what I mean? It's something you have to be taught not to understand. So.
Well, and there's a section in the book where they talk about certain people not being so much concerned or seeing Black people as fellow Americans, but as you people. Mm. So how do you get to the commonality when if 85% of the group may be looking at you differently? Maybe you can't be common because there's such a reflection coming back at you that you can't feel any commonality. And they talk about that on ahead in chapter 4, which we will get to, and how it's just been a total disenfranchisement. Yes.
Okay.
And how we have kind of just lost hope, and given up. And after you have tried to explain it, I can see where there's a defeatist attitude, kind of, we need a motivational speaker so bad right now. Yeah. And I'm
going to bookmark that defeatist too.
Right.
I have a lot of thoughts on that.
Yeah.
Let me read a quote that I'm reminded of because of what Kelli just said. It says, for liberals, Black people are to be included and integrated into our society and culture, while for conservatives, they are to be well-behaved and worthy of acceptance by our way of life. Mm-hmm. Both fail to see that the presence and predicaments of Black people are neither additions to nor defections from American life, but rather constitutive elements of that life. Yeah. In other words, when are we, so here's what this quote reminds me of. When are we going to get to when are we going to acknowledge that our government is supposed to be by and for the people? It's like what it's talking about here, I think, is that Black people are seen as a problem because they don't fit in with the dominant culture. They have to somehow prove themselves to the dominant culture. Yes. Since when does that have anything to do with anything?
Yeah.
And I think the part of the problem is that we're dealing with ideology instead of dealing with the needs of people. It's like, okay, can we start with a big freaking blank slate and say, what do people want?
Right.
And not people with an asterisk.
Right.
Either.
Right.
And that's all. I want to give the floor over to Kelli and KA on this because this is a great springboard. Go for it.
Well, and everybody says we want equality till it's time to sit down and have those conversations. Let me pull up some of my quotes here that I've gathered from the reading. And the first one I'm going to share is Dr. West says, most of us remain trapped in the narrow framework of the dominant liberal and conservative views of race in America. And I think that, and when the policymakers, the lawmakers, the judges, the police officers, when they are a predominantly white face, or they have a white face representing them, it puts us, at a disadvantage. We can't, how do you overcome that? When the person that's judging you has no shared experiences with you, doesn't want to have shared experiences with you, feels like you're almost an alien in the room, when you were born here just like they were.
You're a problem. As a starting point, you're a problem.
You're not
Yes,
included in the.
And
Yeah.
people like you are a problem.
right.
You know,
And
we have a race problem, but it's very limited as to what that even means.
yeah. And it's so broad. The definition is so broad. And if you ask 20 people, they'll give you 20 different definitions. And most of them stem from personal experiences. But at the end of the day, is it fair to judge the many by the actions of the few?
So Kelli, what's the problem you're getting at, and what do you think is the solution?
The problem is that we are not having complete conversations about race. We are not having honest conversations about race on either side. Because I would much rather hear somebody tell me straight to my face that they don't like me than to hide behind politically correct trigger words like thug and ghetto and stuff like. The political correctness has created a brand new shiny shield for monsters to hide behind because they changed their vocabulary. We have literally legitimized the hate culture by letting it be sweetened up a little bit. Oh, well, they didn't say X, Y, and Z. And we're all over here like, but yeah, they did say A, B, and C though. And so, like I said, it allows this secret language to continue to be spoken among hateful people. And we all know it. It's not like we don't speak the language. We've lived here under political correctness since the 90s. We know what it has turned into, and it's a nice nasty fest.
And Kelli, see if you've seen this, but it's like, have you seen white people working really hard to be accepted by black people?
They are trying so hard to do and say the right thing all the time. And it has got to be exhausting. It's got to be. The eggshells. And I get it. I mean, there are reasons you should walk on eggshells, and nobody wants to say the wrong thing to hurt somebody's feelings. But at the same time, if you're trying to have an honest conversation, honest things need to be said. And it doesn't necessarily have to be, it's not going to be nice, because this is not a nice conversation to have. Nobody wants to have this conversation, not in its entirety.
Well, what issues are people avoiding?
Oh, they're definitely avoiding the history of the monumental effort that racism has been throughout our history. It has been an active, cohesive effort to oppress this one group of people through legislation, through the finance system, through violence, through education. There are so many. Racism touches every aspect of our daily lives, and it had to get there somehow. So it's been disseminated amongst the masses, it's being passed around, and the people who are the target of it, Black people, we are well aware that this is going on in the back rooms and not so back rooms. But there are some people who just do not even want to acknowledge the fact that their racist uncle has an impact on the community. Well, if he owns a business and he doesn't hire Black people, yes, he does. If you have, there are families that are still benefiting from the slave trade or owning land that they have been on since before the Civil War. So to say that there haven't been advantages to get somebody to admit that they have gotten to where they are with all of this help that they don't believe they've had. How do you convince somebody of that?
Okay, speaking of land, one of Jake's quotes addresses land, and I'd like for us to talk about intergenerational wealth transfer and intergenerational trauma, and how it's hard to get honest until you can redistribute land.
Yeah.
One of Jake's quotes is talking about Marcus Garvey, Garvey's appeal to blacks' post-war pessimism came at a propitious moment. Black nationalism was predicated on deep pessimism and on Black people understanding self-determination in a mode in which the issue of land was never seriously addressed. Garvey wanted to, but could not address the issue of land. So there's a couple of key elements there. One is land, and the other is pessimism. But I just wanted to say that it's hard to bring about equality until you can redistribute land. And even that, it's hard to understand that until we realize that our agricultural system today is way messed up. Heck, the agricultural system was way messed up when we had slavery and we were exhausting the land, and there was a perceived need to declare war on Mexico and steal a third of Mexico so that in the South they could keep moving across, can find new lands to exhaust, but I digress.
You know, at the end of slavery, freed, emancipated slaves were primed to take over farming and agriculture as we knew it in the South. So the immediate fear of poor white people was that they were getting ready to lose out. They had already seen 200 years of what these agricultural juggernauts were able to produce out of the swamps and hills and farmlands of Tennessee, Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi, and Louisiana. So they were very frightened that they were about to lose control of the food system, and they very well might have, had they left Black people to their own devices and let us go on and do what we needed to do at the time. But through jealousy and envy, which are, unfortunately, you get rid of all of these other outside problems, you never get rid of jealousy and envy. That's as old as time.
Well, there was talk about giving freed slaves 40 acres and a mule, and it never happened, but it's easy to see how that would have been entirely appropriate to take the plantation lands, divide them up, redistribute them. So that's easy to see, but yet Americans are never taught how we still systematically dispossess people of their land. And redistribution of wealth gets a bad name, but it would be entirely appropriate. Yeah, Jake?
Yeah, I was just going to say that, just to recenter on what we talked about at the beginning with this sort of idea of radical democracy, right? And I'd like to hear from KA too. I know that he hasn't really been able to jump in, but I'd like to hear him on this, is the idea that what was being talked about in this discussion, and I didn't want to just quote like the entire chapter that I was reading because that would be a bit unwieldy. But what West was talking about here was essentially saying that with Black nationalism as a movement, right? And there have been many different iterations, and I wanted to talk about this a little more because I feel like we're at a point where we're seeing a resurgence in some Black nationalist ideas. But what he was talking about was essentially that a lot of the time when you have these national movements of a marginalized people, what is not addressed is the idea of ownership, right? Because a lot of the times you're starting from a point of saying Black people have been historically, systemically separated from the means of production, right? Land and all this. Mm-hmm. So the idea should be that we put those things into Black hands. And I think what he's trying to interrogate is which hands, right? Who owns that land? Yes, you can say Black people, but which Black people, right? It's sort of what he's getting at here, I think. I don't want to put words in his mouth, obviously. But yeah, I just wanted to kick that out to KA, especially because I haven't heard from him in a second. But just
if you're just joining us, this is Truth to Power. This is Hart Hagan on WFMP Forward Radio in Louisville, and we've got Jake Bush, Kelli McGuffey, Danita Wright, and K.A. Owens, and we're talking about Race Matters by Cornel West. So K.A., did you have a Cornel West quote you wanted to share with us?
Sure. Now, this is from a recent interview with Cornell on Democracy Now! And so Cornell West says, begin quote, "Well, there's no doubt that this is America's moment of reckoning. But we want to make the connection between the local and the global because, you see, when you sow the seeds of greed domestically, inequality globally, imperial tentacles, 800 military units abroad, violence in AFRICOM and Africa, supporting various regimes, dictatorial ones in Asia, and so forth, there is a connection between the seeds that you sow of violence externally and internally. Same is true in terms of the seeds of hatred, of white supremacy, hating black people, anti-blackness, hatred having its own dynamic within the context of a predatory capitalist civilization obsessed with money, domination of workers, marginalization of those who don't fit, gay brothers, lesbian sisters, trans, and so forth. So it's precisely this convergence that is causing the American empire to implode, its foundations being shaken with uprisings from below. So that's from Cornel West, and so that's kind of where we are in the country. And so you asked me when we started the show, how am I? And I said, well, I'm fine, but the country is terrible.
Right.
And so it depends on how you interpret the American empire imploding. Some people might think that's a good thing. So it depends on what can be built from the ashes. I think that people on the extremes of left and right see the empire imploding, but sort of have different interpretations of what that all means. That is, people on the one extreme say, well, if we have a crackdown and use federal police to come into the urban areas and sort of arrest everybody, everything will be okay, which of course it won't. It's just make it worse. And then other folk may have a different idea of what needs to be done, but this imploding, these foundations falling apart, we need to build from the rubble. And so it depends on your attitude toward that, whether you want to be afraid of everything you knew disappearing, or sort of the expectations of normality being taken away. And of course, whose fault it is. Some folks think, well, it's the coronavirus, it's the people in the streets. But the empire was imploding before.
I just want to take this opportunity to notice that we finally have a majority-minority show here on Truth to Power. And I would like to hear from the majority-minority on if the American empire, if the U.S. empire declines and or implodes, is that a good thing or a bad thing? I mean, I have my opinion, but if I spoke the whole time, that would defeat the purpose.
America in concept is not flawed. Democracy is not flawed. What we as people have done to democracy, that is the flaw. What we as a country have defined Black people as white America on the conservative and liberal sides fight over the well-being of their Black child. In the divorce proceedings, as we try to dismantle, as somebody is trying to dismantle the democracy from the inside out. Cornel West mentions politicians no longer being thermostat, but now being the thermometer. So whereas they used to try to control the tone in the country, they respond now to our energy. Whatever energy the American people give, you can guarantee that your politician is going to grab a hold of it and amplify it by 10. because he or she is just trying to get elected. They're not really trying to do a job per se. I think that COVID-19 has really exposed a lot of these, especially on the local level, a lot of these positions that people were holding just in title. And now something real has actually happened. And we realize that we have really elected a lot of straw men into these positions. And they have no clue as to what to do now in a very, very real situation. And I think that I think it's been like that for quite some time as far as the Black community is concerned. There is nobody, I mean, we as a community have told the world what we want. We want to end police brutality. We want equal treatment. We want our lives to matter. What have we been met with? Aunt Jemima is no longer on the syrup.
That's a real cultural victory there.
Right. It's stuff we never asked for. It's all these things. It's like waking up on Christmas morning to some other kid's Christmas list. Like, I don't understand. And we continue to scream as a people. We are screaming at you. We are throwing the tantrum now, and it's not a tantrum like in a childlike way, but we are at that point where you're so frustrated with trying to explain to you what we want and getting nothing. Like I said, could you give Colin Kaepernick his job back? No, but you're going to sing the Black National Anthem for the first week. Come on, we'd never asked for that. That's not what we wanted. And it's through this not hearing a person's request. When they request the same thing using the same words over and over again, it is very, like I said, it leads us to one of my quotes when we get into the 4th chapter talking about nihilism in Black America. And basically, Cornel West says, the liberal and conservative discussions conceals the most basic issue now facing Black America, the nihilistic threat to its very existence. This threat is not simply a matter of relative economic deprivation and political powerlessness, though economic well-being and political clout are requisitions to meaningful Black progress. So you're asking a group of people that have been denied through systematic racism, through over-policing, through bad school systems. You're asking these people, to be just as equal as you are. I don't understand, I don't know if you've heard this in the last week, but oftentimes you hear, I don't understand why they. I don't understand why they do that. I don't understand why they want that. Or you hear a lot of my talk. My ancestors, my people, we didn't. Nobody gave us anything. But at the same time, those people don't want to have a conversation about, but nobody took anything from you though. Mm. You might not have had anything, but nobody came to actively take it. And nobody killed you or ran you off of that piece of cursed earth that you guys were able to turn into something or whatever.
I never owned a slave.
Yeah, huh? That whole thing.
I never owned a slave.
Oh, God, yeah. Okay, you've never owned a slave, but you've gone to McDonald's and you've gotten a cheeseburger from a person that probably has a couple of kids at home. And you don't have any problem with that. You know what they make. You'll go in there and you'll yell in their faces.
That's a free market.
Yeah. How dare they get my cheeseburger order wrong? Yeah. That's where we are in America.
Yeah, and this idea of the sort of nihilism, right? That there's like no real hope for a real substantive change. And I know that what I was reading in my chapter was a lot of discussion of the pervasive understanding of politics sort of leaves out the possibility of an equitable cross-racial coalition. You know what I mean? And
we don't have
Danita,
time. We're so overworked. We don't have time to talk about these things.
Oh, they
right?
You know,
absolutely.
we don't have. You know, it would be unprofitable for the people that own the country. It would be unprofitable to facilitate a real public discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, they would
And,
not want to do that.
yeah. And I'd like to hear, I mean, I haven't heard from Danita yet, but like, you know, Danita, KA, you know, just to open it up to more people, because I don't want to take over things. But this idea of the nihilism is something that I really wanted to talk about if possible, because I think it's sort of a key to the whole discussion, right? The whole discussion of what's possible.
Well, in this moment, I think that this nihilistic,
right? And KA, you were talking about the potential to like, exactly. So, you know, Danita, KA, somebody, you know, what are your feelings on hope?
If the concept of nihilism of people without hope, not believing in anything, one of the things that Dr. West talks about is sort of the neoliberal economics of you know, the Clintons, Obama and Biden, and you know, what if when Obama was president, I mean, let's say that was the last chance to arrest the decline. I think the decline was inevitable, but let's say there had been an American Renaissance. What if Obama had said, look, we're going to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. We're going to save the post office. We're going to undo the Republican sabotage of the post office. We're going to do single payer, so on and so forth. I mean, because remember when Obama was first president, he controlled both houses of Congress. I mean, would that have stayed the decline? It might have slowed it down, and I think there's a possibility if Obama had done that, if there actually had been a renaissance under Obama. You know,
I've said that, I'm going to let you continue, KA, but I've said this before. If I could be anybody in history, I would want to be Barack Obama in 2009, because he had an opportunity that has not, he had an opportunity that's never occurred before or since. But go ahead.
So, well, there you are. And because there were so many things wrong with the criminal justice system, the economic system, that is the whole middle class prosperity had just been destroyed by the business class in America. Hope for the future, so on and so forth. And if there is a possibility that if Obama had initiated an American Renaissance, we wouldn't be where we are now. Because I think if he had done those things, there would have been no Trump, because Trump is a product of a large numbers of people giving up on both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party establishment. People just threw up their hands, or a significant number of white people just threw up their hands and say, hey, both the Democratic Party establishment and the Republican Party establishment, they just don't care. And so they threw up their hands and threw a Molotov cocktail at the system, and that was Donald Trump. I mean, there were white people who said in 2016 that, yeah, I know there's a chance he may burn the whole thing down, but what choice have I got? You know, that's what they felt.
I think they see very clearly this go round. They're going to have to find some new choices. They're going to have to dig deep and find some reasons, because, like you said, the manifestation of all of that hope and aspiration that we were kind of walking around in rose-tinted glasses as Black American people in this country during the Obama era. Like, is it really over? Could this be so? I mean, we won. We finally we won, and then for it to evolve into something that really wasn't a huge, like, personal community win. really, really help the poor people of America pull themselves out of poverty kind of move. Like they said, he didn't raise minimum wage. He established healthcare, but he didn't regulate the systems that the healthcare had to service. So they went unchecked and unfettered and basically inflated all the prices so that it's unaffordable for the average American. And he continued to spend 53 cents of every tax dollar on defense, in spite of being a liberal, you know. So he just basically continued on the agenda that was in play.
With liberals like that, who needs conservatives?
Well, I'm right. I mean, at the end of the day, what was different? I mean, he's still spending the same amount of money on the same things. While we as Americans, and Cornel West talks about this, the road systems, the public school systems, all of these systems we're watching fail because it is a sign of how much neglect we will allow in our daily lives to prop up our ideas. You know, the cognitive dissonance that these people care about us, you know, as we get ready to send thousands and thousands of educators and school children into schoolhouses across America in a few weeks, but the government cares about us. I said there's a disconnect there. Something's not connecting from what we think and what is reality.
Okay,
You know, we have a constitution. We have the oldest actively codified constitution of any other country.
Mm-hmm.
And our constitution clearly states, well, before the constitution, there was a declaration, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. So we have this constitution, and the purpose behind it all is to create one perfect union. We all want to be united together, but how can I unite with you if I don't know who I am? You're not teaching me who I am. So how, because if you're talking about uniting bodies, we can all hug each other, but if you're truly going to embrace me and I'm truly going to embrace you, I have to embrace all there is that encompasses you. That means your ancestors, where you came from. I have to embrace all of that. But again, how can you embrace me when I don't know me? When you won't teach me me? And to me, we're all incomplete without each other, believe it or not. If the universe is all connected, why don't you think men and women are all connected? Why? The human race is connected. That's why you feel, I saw white people crying when they saw George Floyd. You know why? Because they felt themselves. We are all connected. And if you go on that goal of uniting, first let's unite ourselves. Let's complete ourselves and then unite with each other. But we're incomplete. You just like Cornel said, we've created these rootless, dangling people. So if we're incomplete, how can I unite if I don't know who I am? Our kids growing, and when I mean me, I mean our kids and their kids' kids. If you don't put into the schools Black history and teach them about themselves, so they can then they can unite. And not just about them, about others. Let's teach each other about others. If this is going to be one perfect union, we have to unite all of ourselves with each other. We have to embrace each other in order to be complete. We complete each other.
Yeah. Jeez, that was, if we're in church right now, I could just, good Lord. That was gorgeously put. And I think that it's really a perfect, way to talk about Dr. West's work is the way that Danita just put it. This idea Because if you'll notice when he talks, no matter who he's talking about, he always, like if he's talking about Bernie Sanders, right? Like a Jewish man, white man, he calls him Brother Bernie, right? And he says that with everybody. And part of that is that he's a religious man. I grew up in the church, so we called each other that. But he does it with everybody. And I think that's very meaningful. It actually has a real meaning to it. It's not just a stylistic choice from Dr. West, I think. I think that what he's trying to assert is this idea that Danita just so eloquently put, which is that, you know, we have to understand that not even in just the spiritual sense, in the material sense, we all are interconnected with one another. You can't avoid that. You know what I mean? Like there's no avoiding the idea that what I do directly impacts everyone else, really, you know, whole butterfly effect of things. And I think that the project and the question, and I know we're running a little short on time, but like, you know, the thing that I was thinking about when I was reading this and why I was looking at, you know, some of his quotes on Black nationalism and how it relates to land and territory and these very like hard material things and ownership, you know, these very hard material things. It just got me thinking of like, you know, how do we codify this concept that Danita's talking about in a really concrete sense? How do we form a society and an economy around that concept of interconnectedness and mutual obligation, right? I have an obligation, you know, I live in Louisville, KA, you live in Louisville, and we have, you know, different, you know, age demographics, race demographics, all these differences, but we share so much with one another. And how do we build that more perfect union that Danita was talking about, that respects that and respects that obligation to one another? You know, I think that's just something that was like my research question through all of this reading that I was doing.
Well, in present day America, there is a lot of hopelessness. There's a lot of downtrodden feelings. There's a lot, we are further apart than we have been in many, many years. I mean, now there's been a silent, uncomfortable, uneasy feeling this whole time, but to be actively hating each other, vocally hating each other in the street and on social media, I think that speaks volumes to the fact that we have indeed, there are too many conditions to embrace commonality. You know, when we talk about how liberal America defines Black people and conservative America defines Black people, those are conditions to our commonality. Whereas when the Black community steps forward and says, we are just Americans just like you, who have problems just like you, and we are met with the resistance because the left has their ideology and the right has their ideology, and they talk right over the top of the community that is being stifled and choked out by these policies. So as much as I would like to come out and say I accept and I love my community unconditionally, I am in a community that's full of people that don't want to wear masks and they want to send the kids back to school, all of them. You know, I can't. How do I look past it? Because that's not my commonality. You know, I can't identify with that. And so I don't know how we would, you know, at this point in time, we have been all over the place tonight, even in this conversation. You know, it's so hard to stay on task with it. You're trying to describe a diamond and it's got 99 facets. Which one do you pick? You pick one that leaves 98. So the enormity of the conversation.
Kelli, I would much rather hear somebody acknowledge that it's complicated than to hear somebody oversimplify it. So
Yeah,
I'm happy that I'm happy that you feel a little bit overwhelmed that we have, these are big, complicated issues, and it's important not to try to collapse it into a soundbite.
yeah, we can't because that's that truncated conversation, and
Hmm.
it damages us as Americans.
Hmm.
It does us no justice to not tell each other the truth about these things. And like I said, if you hurt me, I cannot smile at you and let you hurt me. I have to say something. If and that's how you grow. Even if in the moment it was uncomfortable, if in the moment you felt threatened and attacked, but did you grow from it? I mean, at the end of the day, when you were a little kid and you made a mistake, you were chastised for it so that you didn't make the mistake again. It wasn't because you were dumb and couldn't learn. Somebody just never told you to look at it that way before. And I think that there's a lot that has a lot to do with, the miscommunication between people. I said, because at some point it's not in the politicians' hands, it is in our hands as my neighbor needs to see me as his neighbor and I need to see him as mine. And that means the real conversations have to take place. So, and we're not doing that. We're disconnected from our neighbors and our communities at this point in time as much as we possibly can be.
Kelly, let's get back to that in just a minute, but I need to say that if you're just joining us, this is Truth to Power on Forward Radio 106.5 WFMP FM Louisville, and we are talking about Race Matters by Cornel West. I'm joined by Kelli McGuffey, K.A. Owens, Danita Wright, and Jake Bush, and I'm Hart Hagan. And so I'm going to have another quote, Kelly, that you brought out. A quote from Race Matters by Cornel West. It said, "Most of us remain trapped in the narrow framework of the dominant liberal and conservative views of race in America, which, with its worn out vocabulary, leaves us intellectually debilitated, morally disempowered, and personally depressed." In other words, what I think he's saying there is that we don't have the words to properly express what we're talking about. And for us to do that, it would take time, and the powers that be do not want to give us time. They want us to be overworked and underpaid and sick and tired and broke.
Yeah.
And so if we're going to, what we need to, first of all, great that you all are here having this conversation, because this is at least the beginnings of the conversation that we need to have. And we need to demand from the commercial powers and from our government that they create a space for us to be able to have these conversations. For one thing, there's about a half dozen ways or more that they can lower the cost of living. Don't get me started on that. And but we need, real democracy takes practice. I mean, fake democracy is like go to the football game, or watch the latest reality show. But real democracy takes time and practice.
And when has the government ever just handed over anything to us that was just really, really awesome, guys? I'm a product of public school. I'm proud of it, but I see in a lot of ways it is failing the system. You go to jail, if you get a public defender, you're in trouble. I've never seen the government ante up something. Public housing. Yeah, it's a house. Yeah, thanks, guys. It is good. And then we are not on the street. But at the same time, when they do these things, they don't put in programs to help people get out of those situations.
That's failure by design. You're not,
It's not supposed to work.
Yeah, it's not supposed to work. Government is a puppet. There are people in this country, especially conservatives, but also so-called liberals, who say government is the problem, but government is a puppet. You don't complain about what the puppet is doing. You trace it to the puppet master. And big money, big business is the puppet master. Not small business, but big business is the puppet master. Wall Street is the puppet master. So you have to trace it back to where the real problem is.
We are the puppet master because we
We're
install
supposed
these
to be.
people. We give them that power. They couldn't get to the dance if we didn't buy them that ticket.
Yeah, that's what I was getting ready to say is,
But if you don't,
if you look at people, rich people spend money on lobbyists to lobby for their self-interest. Rich people vote on rich people because they know that they know about them, they know more about them, and that's they are and will represent them. But the weirdest thing is poor people will vote on the richest person too. I don't get that. You know, we
They don't have a
have
choice. The choices are very
representation.
limited.
Say that?
The choices are very limited. You don't have a choice.
Right. By the time we are given that option, Danita, the deal has already been made and we have A or B.
No, you start out with a conglomerate of people running for president, a whole conglomerate, but we want to pick the one that has the most money. It's these people that don't have enough money.
I didn't pick
why
Joe Biden.
Why don't we seek out the ones that I liked? Andrew Yang. I liked him. That's who I liked. So why don't we pick out people that are talking differently, out of the box, that are talking for the poor? Why is it that we're so brainwashed? And we need to look at that. We may be so brainwashed into the propagandish commercials that come out and they capture our attention. We really need to take a look at that.
We know, and we know Biden. Look, quote, air quotes, we know Biden. And he has name recognition. That's how he got there. And we are all terrified that Ruth Bader Ginsburg is gonna go at any time, and then Trump will have another Supreme Court justice. So we are all by the throat here as a party. Like, do we let another Supreme Court justice be installed by Donald Trump, or do we go with old Joe, this guy that we already know? He hung out with that guy we already knew. We like that other guy. Yeah. What could be wrong with Joe?
I think that there's this sort of loop, right? Like the sort of dialectic feedback loop, right? And between the sort of ideal, like the things that we're thinking about, and the material world, right? And like Danita was saying, like sometimes people vote, like a poor person will vote for, you know, the person who's very clearly not interested in helping poor people at all. You know, like a really obvious.
Like the last presidential election.
Yeah, because I mean, shoot, man, like as much as I like to point my finger at systems and not individual people, because I think that you're much more likely to catch the actual issue there. But like, you know, I have poor white family members who I know voted for Trump. I know, I'm sure. And I always am like, do you really think he cares about you, man? But like, the thing is that you just get caught in this feedback loop where, you know, you're caught between your sort of like ideal mental picture of the way things should be and the material reality of the way things are. And
Ivana Trump trying to sell us Goya beans.
Yeah, you end up with things like that.
You know, because now they're trying to get the poor people vote. Come on back, guys, we got beans.
Exactly. They're doing this appeal. God. They're doing this appeal.
But we don't want to do anything out of the box. It's fear of rocking the boat. You know, we don't want to rock the boat. We want we complain about the same old business as usual, yet we vote on the same old business as usual because we're afraid to pick that unknown. We're afraid.
Well, I mean, we tried to pick the unknown in 2016 and the DNC slapped us back down and said, wait a minute now.
2022.
Bernie. But hey, have you seen Hillary? Come on, guys. You know, we tried that, and the DNC basically vetoed our vote.
Right.
And told us that no, what you really need is this lady, not Bernie, but you need this lady. And I think Bernie, for all his gruff ways and his aggressive policies, at least had a real plan for race relations in this country, which up until what we're 45 presidents in now. So that would have made him the first to have a plan to go when he went into office about race relations.
We have about 2 minutes or less left. Why don't we hear from everybody? Really, you need to keep it like the 10 or 15 or 20 seconds. How do you solve the problem of democracy in America in 15 seconds or less?
Mandatory careers for our children. Get our children involved in politics. Get our children involved in leadership positions. Sit on the boards of commissions. Mandatory. Not, no, let them be what they want to be. Not, this is not the time. We're at war.
Okay, K.A.?
Don't be afraid of the end of empire, because we can build something better.
We need to do a whole show on that, K.A. Kelli?
If I can say anything, that we need to listen to each other to hear, not to rebuke. A lot of times in these conversations, you are not hearing the conversation. You are hearing your rebuttal in your mind as you hear them speak.
I thought it was supposed to be like Three Stooges, where we're cracking each other over the head, and that's democracy.
Boy, if we could just all just go out in the field in the middle of the night with, we'll work it out by morning, Hart, I promise you.
Jake, in the spirit of minority majority, you and I have talked enough, so let's just leave it at that. Thanks so much for joining us, but stay on. But for our studio or for our audience, have a great day. This has been Truth to Power. Thank you, Kelli McGuffey, for joining us, Jake Bush, K.A. Owens, and Danita Wright. Have a great day.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Bye now.
Thank you.